Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of The Bikeriders. This is another movie that got me with a TikTok ad. I was scrolling through my For You page and I saw one of those sponsored ads. Sometimes they get people to review movies, they pay them. And I never watch anybody's review going into a movie because I don't want any outside influence. I want to have all my own thoughts. But I stopped on this one just because I saw it was sponsored. And the very first thing this person said was, one of the most anticipated movies of the summer. And I kept scrolling right after that when I realized they were talking about The Bikeriders because I didn't want to hear it. But also, this is not one of the most anticipated movies of the summer. It's been out a couple weeks now at this point. I'm recording this a little bit ahead, fresh off of just seeing it the opening weekend. There was no buzz around this movie. And Austin Butler is arguably one of the biggest actors right now. Fresh off of Dune, he was Elvis. I think this is the first time so far that I've not really seen him do that Elvis voice. It was released at a time where maybe studios were afraid of Inside Out 2 having just a dominant second week. So, hey, let's put up something that's a little bit counter-programming, appeals more to men. Maybe we can sneak in there and have a bit of a sleeper pick. Opening weekend made about $10 million, so maybe that didn't pan out so well. And I'll say at the beginning of this review because I'm going to get into a lot of the negative. Overall, I don't think it was a terrible movie. I just think there wasn't enough story to warrant a 2-hour movie. What this movie is about, it's based on a book of this reporter that traveled around with a bike gang based on the real life Chicago Outlaws motorcycle club that ran rampant in the 1960s. They took that book, turned it into a movie. Austin Butler plays a guy named Benny who is in the motorcycle gang. He is this outlaw, a guy who plays by his own rules, a loose cannon, really one of the wildest people in this motorcycle gang. Tom Hardy plays the head of the club, and he is like the father figure, the one everybody has to turn to make any decision in the club. And overall supposed to be a pretty tough dude. And then Austin Butler's character falls in love with the woman played by Jodie Comer, who she ends up being the one narrating this entire movie. So it is a oral history of the motorcycle gang. You have the actual interviewer, which is one of the guys from Challengers, interviewing her primarily, her voicing over a lot of the dialogue, telling a lot of the story through that interview. And then you also have the reporter interviewing other people in the motorcycle gang. So that is not really the format I was expecting. Based on the trailer I saw, I thought it was just going to be a straight ahead motorcycle greaser movie, which there really aren't a whole lot of. If I had to compare it to some of the best ever made, you got to go back to movies like The Outsiders, even movies like Grease, which is more of a comical type of movie as far as it doesn't really take the motorcycle gang that seriously. It's just a fun musical. So I think there's always a really, really fine line to walk when making a movie about a motorcycle gang, especially taking place back in the 60s. How do you make it feel real? And how do you make it just have a sense of authenticity? So maybe that's why they decided to tell it this way, because they wanted to base it on the book. They wanted it to be as accurate, even though they don't use the Chicago Outlaws Motorcycle Club name. They are called the Vandals. The problem I had with the format of this movie is by doing it through interviews and having this voiceover, it took away a lot of impact throughout moments of the story because you have the narrator telling you exactly what is going to happen before you even see it, taking away some of that impact. There were a lot of moments that I felt were greatly spoiled because it was her saying, so-and-so happened to this character. And then you're like, whoa, that happened to that character? And then you see the actual scene, which took away overall of just feeling anything for anybody with all the hardship that they end up going through, the overall just craziness of being in a motorcycle gang. I didn't really feel it. And the thing is, they keep telling you how crazy this gang is and how much they are feared. You don't really ever see it a whole lot. There are some moments where Austin Butler starts to get into some fights. He's running from police, and you think, all right, I want to see more of this. But overall, when you are telling a story of these people who are supposed to be so bad, that are feared by other motorcycle gangs. Even Tom Hardy's character, who is the head of the gang, and if anybody has a problem, they have to go to him and challenge him, fight him sometimes in order to have any kind of change made within the club. I didn't really feel any qualifiers for his character that he was this BA dude who could take on anybody, who could inflict a lot of pain on somebody, but also take it. And me as the viewer, I found them all to be kind of fragile characters of thinking they're probably going to get their butt kicked because they haven't really proven to me that they are that hardcore. So I think they missed some moments to show you how real, awesome, and gritty they were. And instead, you get a really spacey type of movie where it feels like the action was almost an afterthought. As much as Tom Hardy tried really hard, I think some of the assets around him just weren't really that powerful. One of those being that Austin Butler just felt a little bit overly stoic in this. And maybe that's just his style of acting, being a little bit aloof and mysterious in his character. I just didn't really feel it from him. And I feel like he's kind of relying a lot on his looks right now, because even at the start of this movie, what his love interest was so attracted to with him is that he stood out from all the other guys and he was so attractive. And that was kind of his whole MO throughout the film, of him like adjusting his hair, talking really soft, not really saying a whole lot. And then just him just standing there smoking cigarettes, drinking beer. By the way, this movie did make me want to buy a motorcycle, smoke cigarettes, and drink beer. That's the only real thing it made me want to do. It made me want to be a degenerate. But his character was just so aloof. He tries to go through these developments as a person throughout the film. He's almost like a tough nut to crack. The love interest is really trying to get through and change him a little bit. And you'd never really see that process happen. But what was my biggest struggle with the movie, like I said, it almost felt like they didn't have enough to make an entire film out of. But I feel like it didn't really get to the main story until that very third act, almost those last 20, 30 minutes. It felt like, oh, that is the story right there. This is what this entire movie should have been about. And it would have been way more impactful if it wasn't in this narrative format where it's just an oral history. It should have been entirely focused on, forget Austin Butler's character. It should have been so much focused on Tom Hardy's character, who I found the most interesting, who I felt the most for throughout this film. It should have been told entirely from his perspective, remove the reporter aspect, and just show everything that his character goes through, less of the love relationship with Austin Butler and Jodie Comer. Like, make that the B plot. Make it all about Tom Hardy, and not even so much about the formation of the club, but what they get into the third act and how they deal with the changing of the times, which I found to be the most interesting. It reminded me of one of my favorite movies of all time, No Country for Old Men, of dealing with a new type of criminal, where if you're a little bit more old school, where at a time where maybe crime was a little bit more wholesome, which is what this movie started dealing with. Of in their motorcycle gang, there were certain rules, but at the end of it, nobody was really doing anything overtly violent aside from fighting with people, maybe slashing a couple faces every now and then with a switchblade. But overall, they were able to get along with other people. They weren't doing really any violent crimes. But as you move out of the 60s going into the 70s, you see more struggle of these new people coming in and being just more crazy and reckless and not caring about any of these established rules, that I think the movie should have focused more on the changing of the guard between the old school, between the new school. And I just thought it was kind of funny to look at a time where being in a motorcycle gang was kind of wholesome, and to have that ripped away from you. I think to talk about that more and to show that more with Tom Hardy's character would have been way more interesting. The other really distracting part was all of the accents that were going on. I almost feel like every actor went into their own process of how they were going to tackle the accent. And what you ended up getting was just a kind of mess of all these people trying all different types of things. Therefore, it made a lot of the dialogue feel less authentic and a little bit corny. And that is that line you walk with a movie like this on motorcycle clubs and motorcycle gangs. It made it just feel like biker cosplay, even though the wardrobe in this movie was fantastic. I like that they all look super dirty. If anybody had a white t-shirt, it had all this crap all over it. So it did benefit by having a great wardrobe department, but the performances and the overall tone of the story didn't really match. The one performance I was surprised by, even though at this point I should not question this person whatsoever, was Michael Shannon. You put him in anything, and he instantly makes a movie better and will start acting circles around everybody else. If he would have had more screen time, I feel like he would have been 10 times better than everybody else in this movie. And for somebody like him who can really do any type of thing well, it just shows you how great of a character actor he is. Because if more of these actors had his approach and just his talent to make it feel more authentic, I think overall the entire movie would have benefited from it. Because at the end of it, it almost just felt like a Marlboro ad come to life. Although I did like the way this movie looked. The color palette was very warm and it had that almost old 50s, 60s photograph feel to it. It had all the makings to be a real cinematic darling. I think they could have done a really good job addressing more the toxic masculinity and the inability for men to have healthy relationships with other men, especially where you're supposed to be so hardened and so in a mindset of nothing bothers you, you can't cry. I feel like if they really would have brought that idea home, turned up some of these performances, this could have been a film in a discussion for Best Picture because all the elements were there. It just fell flat in a lot of places. I think with a few changes, it could have been a much better movie. I still enjoyed it overall. It was a little bit boring at times. It did feel a little bit like, why exactly was this movie made? I still feel like Austin Butler has a lot to do in order to grow as an actor. Tom Hardy can really do anything he wants right now. Put out a movie like this and then go be Venom. I'm still all on board for Tom Hardy. Just wasn't my favorite performances from either of them. But for the Bikeriders, I give it 3 out of 5 leather jackets.